Hey Hamza, we're just gonna
Hey Sean, how you doing?
good. We're just gonna give a minute or two, see if anybody else.
Yeah, yeah, sure.
While we're waiting, is there something in particular you could use some help with? You're on mute, by the way.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No good. No
Yeah,
good.
yeah. Well, I was following up with you, but I think I got behind on the coding, so I missed the last part. Uh, but the one that I would like to focus on is the find by ID.
Okay.
Yeah, so I think that one was uh, yeah, find post
So was
and
it
yeah,
find by
find
ID
by ID and the one under. Yeah,
on posts? Okay. So you just want me to go over those again?
yeah.
Okay. All right. Sure. When we look at find by ID, that matches up with this API call. We're doing a get on /ID,
Mm-hmm.
and essentially all we did here was really just took the query and moved it. So we're doing a select all from the users table and then filtering it where ID equals the ID that we pass in. And then that's going to return a collection. And when we call .first, that will allow us to return just the first item from that collection. So here, when the promise resolves, we're going to get back a user object. And it'll either have a value or it won't, depending on how the database query went. And if it does, then we're going to return it back in our API response. And if it doesn't, it's because it wasn't found, which means the ID was invalid. So we'll return back a 404.
So when we use this dot first, uh, that will return the first item that it will find, right? Or the first object that it will find. Is it possible that we might have like more than one object, or we don't use it if we are expecting more than one object?
Sure. Well, when we do this query, we use this syntax where we're retrieving everything here. The .where clause isn't necessarily guaranteed to only result in one record. So the syntax, the results coming back from connects isn't a single record, it's a collection of records. Now in our case, we're searching for a record that has an ID value in the primary key field, which only one of them will. But connects doesn't know that. It just provides us an ability to do a query that could potentially return multiple records. And so without the .first statement, the thing that we get back is a collection. But when we look at .first from a connects point of view, .first says it's similar to select, but it only retrieves and resolves with the first record from the query. So technically, instead of doing .select, we can pass in a list of columns if we want. It's optional. If we don't, it'll return everything. But select will return a collection, whereas dot first will return only the first record that matches. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's clear.
Okay. And then find posts, again, this is just the syntax of doing a join. So if we didn't do dot first here, then the default would be to do a select star, which would be return all records and all columns that match.
Mm-hmm.
Dot first with no column names means return the first record that matches with all columns. Similar here, DB with a table name is just going to do a select star on that table name. But when we add to it a dot join, then we need to say what table we're joining and what fields from each table that we're using in our condition to match. The default operation here is an equal sign. So our condition is this field equals that field, or the user ID field from the posts table matches the ID field from the users table. Okay, so this is our statement here. Is like the from clause, which is from posts, join users on p.userid equals u.id. Then our select statement just indicates what fields or columns from this combined table we want to select. And then where we'll take the entire result set and filter it down based on our where condition.
All right. Well, yeah, that's clear.
So this, if you remember, we'll go back to this
Yes.
and look at the Northwind database. Let me start a new thing here. If I do select star from employee join shipper. Let's see what it is. Did I spell it wrong?
Semicolon.
It doesn't like employee. Did I spell this wrong? It thinks I'm on the wrong database here, so let me change my database. There we go.
Right.
Okay. So remember, this is just doing a combination of every record from employee with every record from shipper. Or if we did order would be better. Right, this is a combination of every record from employee with every record from order. But not all of these match, right? So if I wanted to, I could say employee.id, order.employee ID. Then all the rest of the order fields or columns. So every one of these combinations here where the ID of the employee and the employee ID in the order table aren't the same, that's an invalid record. Yeah. But you can see that I have a table here that has that data in it. And I can do a select against this table and get this data back. I just happen to know it'd be useless. It's not useful to me at all. Because combining this employee with an order that belongs to another employee doesn't help me at all.
Right.
So the join clause, all the join clause is going to do is take out all of these invalid records, right? So this is the first valid one that it'll keep. There's another valid one that it'll keep. Mm-hmm. Everything else is going to get culled or removed. And I'll end up with a table that doesn't have 150 plus thousand, 149,000 records. It'll have much fewer, far fewer records, but it'll be 16,000 of them. I mean, it's quite a few records.
Yep.
And so in a similar vein, when we look at this, when we find posts, when we're combining posts with users, it's going to be a collection.
149,000.
Yeah. Well, no, this would be more like the 16,000, right? It'll be a valid collection of records, and they're all good. I really only want one of them. I'm only interested in one of them. So all the records in this joined table, because of this condition here, are good. They're good records, but there's a bunch of them. The only one I care about is the one where the user ID matches the ID I passed in. That's why I need the where clause.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so this condition makes sure that my source table is valid. And then this condition lets me find the one record in that valid source table that I care about.
Yep.
Okay.
And that makes sense.
Okay. Anything else?
In this regard, it's clear. But I was thinking, like, how can you use the function data or the output that comes from the function, like the minimum and the max and stuff like that? When you do that query in SQLite or even like with Kinnex, what format will it come out, and how can we use it in our app?
So this statement right here, this connect statement, actually is going to produce a SQL command, right?
Right.
And just to kind of demonstrate that, if I, before I do a return, if I execute that, and then I think it's, then if I take this and okay, so when I do a find post, it's going to take this connects
Turn it into SQL
command and turn it into a SQL statement and then log it, right? So let me save it. Let me turn this back on so we can see it, and then do this find posts. You can see here the SQL that it returns is select p.id, u.username, p.contents from posts as p interjoin users as u on p.userid equals u.id, where user ID equals, and then it has this question mark, but this is before it's actually substituted our value there, but what will actually end up being here is an actual value. So my point is that what this command does is just gives us a SQL statement, and then what the system does is it takes this SQL statement and executes it against our database. Right. And then
and the output will be a JSON.
Yep.
Output. Yeah.
Yep. So we'll get a JSON. And that's why what we're returning here is what this results in. So this is going to actually give us a promise, and the result of the promise is a JSON object that has all of our results in it. So one thing that I have found confusing in the past when it comes to Kinnex is to keep in mind that each of these query builder statements that we can work with here returns something, but it's not necessarily consistent. So we looked, for example, at the select statement. Is going to return a JSON object, and the dot first will as well. But dot first will take just the first item and return a JSON object of that, whereas select will return an array of JSON objects, right? And so being able to decipher and go through the documentation and look and understand what each command returns.
You understand the documentation to make sure that you have the right output.
Yeah. Yeah, so this is going to return actually a collection. Okay, because again, select returns a collection. If we look at what we're doing with the result from find posts, here is we're taking that full collection and just returning it as a JSON object.
Mm-hmm.
So when we look at what came back here, you can see what I got was an array of 3 different objects here.
Yeah. So I was thinking about, I'm not sure if the other guys have any questions. I don't want to take the whole time for myself. Manny, if you, and Tiffany, if you guys have anything to ask, just go ahead.
Oh, no, I'm okay. I'm just here to kind of listen. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm just listening to.
All right. So what I'm thinking about, Sean, is like the application of this. Let's say if I'm building up some kind of financial model where it will accumulate data from some database and present it in a different shape or in an analytical shape, where it will create, like, the query that we will create will become a certain table that we will use to display some financial analysis, let's say. And the query will become the schema of the new table. I'm just, thinking out loud. And the where's that? The line 31 in user model. Will that become like the schema for the new query table?
Well, this is definitely determining the shape of the result
of the table, right?
The result set, yeah. So this is specifying what rows show up. This is specifying what columns there are in the result set. So they're really, when it comes to SQL, you have your source table, you have your result set, and then you have the original tables or the data tables. Very often the data tables and the source table are the same thing, right? So in this case here, the users table is both the data table and the source table. We're selecting from the users table directly. Whereas here, we're using the posts table and the users table to join together to create a new source table. So we've got 2 different data tables and a new source table. And then the select statement is going to produce a results table, which we can then filter and order the where clause in the order. So yeah, so that what the select does is tells us with the results table what columns are going to show up there or exist there.
Can we do some like high level math applications or math calculations on the SQL level?
That really depends a lot on the server that you're using.
Okay.
Some of them will extend SQL to include functions that you can call that are more sophisticated. I know that Microsoft SQL Server, for example, if you're familiar with .NET, you have the ability to make calls out to .NET functions with data from within a stored procedure. So you create a stored procedure, which is like a custom function that's written in SQL. But in that, you have the ability to call out to .NET functions that are in assemblies, outside of the SQL Server. And so in that sense, you can perform functions on the data that's in the table, in the database, a lot more naturally. Beyond that, you've got to do things like employ and deploy and implement a cube, which will give you really sophisticated analytical capabilities beyond just what's in the SQL statement. So it really depends on the server and the system that you're using.
Okay. So KNX will not do that on its own. It depends on like what kind of server behind it.
Yeah, all Connects does is allow us to code in JavaScript to a standard interface.
Mhm.
And then based on our configuration on the back end, understanding what database server we're targeting, Connects will take our JavaScript statements and turn it into a valid SQL statement that works for that server. We'd like to think that SQL was the same on every SQL server, every database server that there is, but there are subtle differences. Sometimes those differences are based on bugs that have been longstanding. Sometimes those differences are based on, just small syntactical changes that are not the same. And so Connects helps us not have to worry about that. We just write to the Connects interface, and then they take care of producing, semantically correct SQL for the target database that we've chosen. So in and of itself, Connects doesn't do anything. This what I showed you before, this right here,
Yeah.
this really is what Connects does. After it produces that SQL statement, so you'll notice that when we look at the package.json file, you'll notice that in addition to Connects, we also have this database driver, SQLite 3. If we were connecting to a Postgres database, we would have a different driver called PG, right?
Yeah.
What Connects does is it produces this SQL statement, and then it hands it off to the database driver. The database driver is the thing that interacts with the database server or the database file in the case of SQLite, and actually does the query. And Connects doesn't even query anything. All it does is produce the SQL. That's why they call it a query builder. That's all it does, is it builds a SQL query, and it uses that to pass it along to the database query, to the database driver, gets the results back from the database driver, and sends it back into our code.
Yeah, well, that makes sense. Well, that's all I got. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, no, you bet. Hopefully that was helpful.
Very helpful. Thanks.
Hi, I have a question regarding today's project. Can I share my screen really quick?
Sure.
Thank you. Oh, for some reason I can't share it. It says host as disabled attendee screen sharing.
Let me see if I know how to enable it.
If you turn me into a co-host, I'd be able to real quick.
You have to go on the little arrow next to the share screen, I think it is. And there's a settings there to be able to change it to allow. So at the bottom, in the middle button, green button, there should be a chevron arrow looking thing.
Yeah, I see that. And it says, let's see, one participant can share at a time. That may have been the issue because I was still sharing, but I stopped sharing. Try it again, Tiffany, and see if it'll let you do it now.
Yeah, I'm still getting the
There should be like another option there, like a settings or something, gives you a pop-up, and then you can.
Here we go.
Sweet.
Okay, try that.
Awesome. I just need clarification on the README thing. So I finished the project kind of based off of the router. I looked at the functions necessary, but in the README, so there is this extra function called add step, but it's missing in the README. If you, like right here, a database methods, find by, where did it go? Dang it.
It's in the bottom on the stretch.
Oh, is that in the stretch? Oh, okay. I did the stretch without you. Never mind. I'm sorry. Thank you. Thank you, Maddie.
You get what you needed, Tiffany?
Yes. That was such a stupid question. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Stop laughing, Maddie.
Manny, that was quick.
Shoot.
I was still looking like, okay, where can it be? And then like Manny just got the answer.
You solved it
That's
before I
usually
did.
that's usually where I find stuff that is not on the main stuff, and but I see it somewhere else. I'm like, wait a minute, and going down stretch. Oh, okay, yeah, let's stretch.
He answered my question before I even finished asking.
Sometimes I think Manny could teach this class. I don't even know why I'm here. All right. All right. Anything else?
Oh, that's all for me. I really appreciate it, Sean.
Yeah, you bet. Anytime. You guys have a great night. We'll catch you in a couple days.
All right, you too.
All right, bye.
Have a great day.
Thank you.